As we do on a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan Flynn is Deputy Director of the ACL. Dan's back with us. Hi, Dan. Welcome back to 2020.
Hi, Neil. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, Dan, let's talk Victorian state election because Victorians are off to the polls really starting today. Pre-poll voting is starting and the balance of power in the upper house is a major challenge here. What are your thoughts for what's developing with the Victorian state election?
Well, I think there are exciting times ahead this next 2 weeks, and as you say, pre-polling is starting today. I've been in Victoria, living there for the last week, and close to people who are involved in politics. We're obviously, Neil, not really on about candidates. We're on about the issues and the values. And we think these issues are probably the most important social issues this election. You know, parental rights to speak to their children, protecting children from confusion about gender identity, and protecting the unborn. And when we've looked at the parties and we've looked at the candidates, Neil, here's what we've come up with. That the Labor Party has been bad on these things. The Liberal Party has been silent on certainly the gender confusion issue. That's a concern. Some green shoots, though. We're seeing some positive policy offerings from the DLP and from Family First. And, you know, we're happy to say, okay, well, you know, here's how the candidates, good and bad, stand on this. Candidates that are standing out to us in the Northeastern Metropolitan, Alistair Cameron, Southeastern Metropolitan, Lee Jones, Western Metropolitan, Bernie Finn, Labor DLP, Lee Jones and Alistair Cameron from Family First, as is Darren Buller. So these people have put on record on their website that they would repeal the conversion and suppression law and that they would protect the unborn. And, you know, in terms of Christian values, that's what we highlight. And, we're letting people know that Labor and Daniel Andrews have been bad and detrimental on these issues. So we're doing what we can to get the word out with volunteers on the street, with advertising in newspapers, with flyer distribution, because we want the constituency to be informed when they vote.
Dan Flynn, just come back to the DLP for a few moments, because the DLP, they have their ups and downs, been around for a long, long time, always had this fabulous family Christian basis to it, and there's a bit of a revival that's happened with the DLP. As you say, Bernie Finn is one of the candidates for the DLP. What are your thoughts for the revival of the DLP here too? Because we're talking about revival of Family First, but the DLP back on the scene.
Very much so. Bernie Finn was expelled from the Liberal Party earlier this year because of his pro-life views. He put out some Facebook message about the time that Roe versus Wade was repealed. The Liberals told him it was off message and they expelled him. And it was all a very moderate post by Bernie. Bernie Finn I've known for many years, and he is a dedicated pro-life politician who just simply wants abortion to stop in Victoria. So he could not find a home in the Liberal Party, has been endorsed by Labor DLP, and that's a real revival going forward. And so we know how Bernie will vote. We know how he will stand. He's a known quantity, and we are very happy to highlight his name in our campaign materials.
Now, Lee Jones is going to be our guest after our conversation. What are your thoughts on Lee Jones and the revived Family First?
Look, the revival of Family First is a great thing because, again, they're being explicit that they will defend parental rights, protect children in their education from gender confusion, and protect the unborn. So Lee Jones is a lead candidate, and for that I applaud him. And this particular party is led by Lyle Shelton and has great candidates who I know personally. Alistair Cameron, who has worked extensively for ACL in a previous life, not that long ago, and Darren Buller, a very devout Christian. So, we're not in the business of endorsing candidates. Our role is to give information out, and on the information that matters to Christians, these guys definitely get a tick from us.
Well, I'm glad you've mentioned their names, because while the election's not until the 26th, pre-poll voting starts today, Dan. And so lots of Victorians will take advantage of the opportunity we have to cast a ballot early. And what are your thoughts for people who are going off to the polling booth today, hearing perhaps even for the first time that the DLP's back, that Family First is there in the mix? What are your thoughts for those who might be thinking about these sorts of pro-family policies and ways they might approach their voting?
I think they should go and have a look at the DLP website for policies and also the Family First website policies. When they get to an early voting centre, they should take their How to Vote card, and they will see what's suggested in terms of a vote in the upper house and in the lower house seat that they belong to. So in every region that Lee, Alistair, Darren or Bernie are running in, there are 11 lower house seats, and there's advice on how to vote there. So I think that'll be solid on the values. Of course, people might choose to vote Labor. People might say, no, actually, Dan, I listened to you and I like abortion. I think abortion's good, and I want to vote for Daniel Andrews. Well, we say that's their prerogative. We are simply putting out the information. And interestingly, Neil, we do have people come back to us and say, thank you for letting me know I'm going to be voting for Daniel Andrews. We say that's fine. It's really for us to put the information out and let people decide. But I think picking up relevant how to vote cards will help people with that journey.
You can't force people to vote any particular way, but you can alert them to the challenges that are ahead if they vote one way or another, and especially around that life issue. Hey, Dan, the Australian Christian Lobby has for now a long time been building a standing army of volunteers who are ready to knock on doors and put pamphlets into letterboxes, and you've got all sorts of activities no doubt planned. Can you let us in on some of the sorts of things that you've got Victorian volunteers up for in the lead up to the election?
I certainly can. We are door knocking in the electorates of Sydenham, Point Cook, Mulgrave, that's the Premier's seat, Cranbourne, Mill Park, Ringwood and Bayswater. In every one of those 7 electorates, we have a local campaign organiser, and we have volunteers on the ground delivering relevant flyers. So if people go to the ACL website, there's something at the top says volunteer, and then that will be filtered through, and we can connect people with a team. The teams are going out again on Saturday, which is the last Saturday before the election, and we'd love to see people as we build the movement, and we take a long-term view to, okay, there's this election, but there's also the next 4 years. So I think, Neil, we want to say we'll be very active in the next 4 years. Whoever's in government will be holding them to account, and our foot soldiers will be on the ground.
You know, I think everyone agrees there's a lot at stake in the upcoming Victorian state election. And this thought that if there is a balance of power held in the upper house by organisations, political parties like Family First and the DLP, that is one way to try and stem the flow of some of the bad legislation that floats through Victoria, isn't it? What are your thoughts here for the possibility of a balance of power in the upper house?
Look, I think it's essential because unbridled power is not good, and if the Andrews government is re-elected, then the only check on that power would be a Conservative crossbench. And so a Conservative crossbench would put a brake on a very progressive social agenda. Can I say this, Neil? Martin was speaking to a crowd of about 4,600 people in Melbourne on Friday night, and he catalogued some of the recent social policies. He asked people to pray for Daniel Andrews and, pointing out the error of his ways in the social policy initiatives. And it was a poignant moment to say, pray for Daniel Andrews, pray for his soul. It was a remarkable moment. We'll look to get that little clip onto Facebook so that people can watch that. We'd love Daniel Andrews to watch it because it was very beautifully said. I
was going to talk about this very shortly, but let's talk about this Truth of It Live event that happened on Friday night. As you say, 4,600 people turned out to hear Martin Iles deliver the third part in his trilogy around Babylon. How do you think generally the crowd received the message that was delivered?
They were very engaged, lots of sort of interjections, generally of a positive nature, and lots of crowd interplay. So it was very good. Martin very much expounding the risks of Babylon, the seductions of Babylon, the hard pressure that comes against people, the pressure to conform, the seduction of wealth, and the comfort that Babylon offered in times past that we can be subject to, and it actually causes us to forget God. So it was a beautiful message, and I think this tour has really done so much for the mandate of ACL. Certainly in recent years, we may have had 500 or 600 to a conference. For there to be 4,600 there was staggering, and I think it tells us a lot about people's sense of, I want to put some action behind my faith. I want to see a change in politics that better reflects God's values.
As you say, ordinarily you'd get 400 to 600 people, and then 4,600 turn out to see Martin Iles deliver that presentation. Is this a sign, Dan, that there is a grassroots movement that is not prepared to just go down in flames here, but want to stand and see some righteousness return?
I think so, Neil, and I think the crowd, there was no disturbance in the crowd. We have often had a lot of violent problems in Victoria in the past. We had none, and I think that there's a sense of breakthrough there, that the crowd is sufficient in number to probably make the protesters not want to take it on. Love seeing that momentum and that headway, with God's truth being made public.
Okay, let's touch on some of the big issues that are happening in some other states. Victoria clearly is very important with the focus in the lead up to the state election, but let's focus on Tasmania for a few moments, because you at ACL, you ran a full-page advertisement in the state's major newspaper last week, which says proposed conversion laws would criminalise parents who question their children's wish to change gender. What sort of reaction have you had to your full-page ad?
It's been a huge reaction. This has just dominated the media last week, dominated the mind of the Premier, Premier Rockcliffe, and other activist groups in Tasmania. So the full-page ad basically said, it was a message to the Liberals, that if the Liberal government, if they support, conversion legislation, then they will lose government. That's the message. And it was based on very accurate third-party polling that said that most people don't know about this legislative initiative, but they oppose it, and they would vote against an MP who supported it. So that data was put out in a full-page ad, and frankly, people's MPs, their hair went on fire. The Premier is, meeting with Christopher Brough here last week, and very concerned about the ad. But Christopher's response was that the ad is meticulously correct. Christopher Brough here is our Tasmanian director. The ad revealed a huge sensitivity to the proponents of these, anti-prayer, anti-parent laws, and there is no doubt that the report that has been put to the Premier does enable parents to be criminalised for their conversations with children. And if the government's so concerned about it, they should just come out and say, look, we will make sure that parents are not criminalised. They could say, we'll make an adjustment to the law. But at this stage, it's just claiming that it's all false. There's been a lot of media, a lot of television over it. The reality is that this has hit a nerve. And I think the other thing we're seeing, Neil, is that in the Liberal Party in Tasmania, there are conservatives and there are not so conservatives, and it's generating a lot of good debate in the parliamentary party, which is exactly what should be happening to put a brake on these laws.
There's been some independent polling of parents or of people's view about the parents' rights. What sort of things have been revealed in those polls, Dan?
Well, simply that people do not know that the government is considering this law. They don't know. And that's the first thing. So the government is doing it, potentially doing it on the quiet. The government doesn't want people in Tasmania to know this is happening. And, putting this in full-page advertisements in the Mercury is informing people, conservative voters who voted in the Liberal government, of exactly what they're up to. So that is what it's telling us.
Right, and some of those challenges already being represented in the state of Victoria, but talking through those issues in Tasmania, let's shift our focus to the north, in the Northern Territory, where Christian schools are at real risk right now. What are thoughts to Territory's anti-discrimination laws and those changes that are expected later this month?
Look, we've been hearing for years about a federal religious discrimination bill, and the importance of that, the importance of schools being able to hire teachers according to their faith and ethos. But the Northern Territory, in other words, the damage is going to be done potentially at state and territory level. And the worst bill is in the Northern Territory, where there's a bill now before the Parliament that would remove protections for religious schools, that schools won't be able to hire staff who on the basis of ethos or values. And that's an incredible blow for Christian schools. I have been speaking to some of the leadership in Christian schools. They are very concerned about this development in Northern Territory and how it might spread to the states. So Christian schools are under a lot of pressure, Neil, at this time, and just simply to maintain their genuine Christian operations. So certainly urge all of your listeners to pray for Christian schooling. It's a very important part of our society, a very important part of Christianity in Australia.
Well, I don't think there was a single part of this conversation that isn't very, very important in Victoria, in Tasmania, and in the Northern Territory. And for listeners in those jurisdictions, my encouragement is to visit the Australian Christian Lobby website. There are a number of mechanisms there by which you might be able to take some action in whichever state or territory you are listening from today. It's acl.org.au. That's the website of the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au. Dan Flynn is Deputy Director of the ACL. Dan, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
That's my pleasure, Neil. Thank you.